The Bélmez Faces. In August 1971, Maria Gómez Cámara was in her kitchen in Bélmez de la Moraleda, Spain, when she noticed something impossible forming on her concrete floor. A human face was appearing, not painted, not carved, but emerging from within the concrete itself, as if developing like a photograph. She tried to destroy it with a pickaxe. The face came back. Then more faces appeared. The Bélmez Faces became one of the most studied paranormal phenomena of the 20th century. Over the course of 3 decades, dozens of faces appeared on the kitchen floor, walls, and other surfaces of the house. They would form gradually, change expression over days or weeks, fade away, and new ones would appear. Some faces seemed anguished, others peaceful. All were impossible. What makes the Bélmez Faces relevant to observation-dependent reality is what happened when researchers tried to study them scientifically. When the floor was under constant observation, when cameras were recording, when researchers were present, the faces would appear more frequently and with greater detail. When the house was empty and unobserved for extended periods, the phenomenon slowed or stopped entirely. The faces seemed to know when they were being watched. Scientists removed sections of the concrete floor for laboratory analysis. The faces in those sections faded and never reappeared, as if being removed from the context of observation destroyed whatever was creating them. New faces appeared in the house to replace the ones that had been taken. When researchers installed hidden cameras to record the faces forming, the equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. The few successful recordings showed the faces appearing gradually over hours, the concrete itself seeming to reorganize its structure, but only during periods when someone was in the house. Skeptics argued the faces were hoaxes created by the Cámara family for attention or profit, but the phenomenon persisted for decades, surviving chemical analysis, expert scrutiny, and multiple attempts to debunk it. The faces appeared whether the family wanted them to or not, and the correlation between observation and manifestation remained consistent. More watchers meant more faces. Longer observation meant clearer images. Absence meant fading. In 2004, researchers discovered that the house was built over an ancient cemetery. Excavations beneath the kitchen floor revealed human remains and artifacts, suggesting the site had been used for burials for centuries. The discovery gave context, but not explanation. Why would human remains beneath a floor cause faces to appear in concrete? And why would those faces only appear when someone was there to see them? The Bélmez Faces suggest something disturbing about the relationship between observation and reality. The phenomenon didn't create faces and then wait for discovery. It created faces in response to observation, as if the act of looking was necessary for the faces to exist at all. The Hessdalen Lights. In the Hessdalen Valley of central Norway, lights appear in the sky with such regularity that scientists have established a permanent research station to study them. But the Hessdalen Lights exhibit behavior that violates our understanding of physics. They appear more frequently when they are being observed, as if awareness itself summons them into existence. The lights were first widely reported in the 1980s, when residents of the valley began seeing unexplained illuminations, floating spheres, elongated forms, geometric shapes that would appear, move through the sky following impossible trajectories, and then vanish. The lights showed up on radar and photography, but couldn't be explained as any known phenomenon. They weren't aircraft, weather balloons, planets, or known atmospheric phenomena. In 1998, Italian and Norwegian researchers established the Hessdalen Automatic Measurement Station, a collection of cameras, radar equipment, and sensors designed to capture and analyze the lights continuously. What they discovered would challenge fundamental assumptions about observation and reality. The lights appeared more frequently during observation periods. When researchers were actively monitoring the valley, the lights showed up more often than when equipment ran unattended. When visiting scientists arrived to study the phenomenon, activity increased. The correlation was strong enough that researchers began to suspect their presence was somehow triggering the manifestations. Even stranger, the lights seemed to respond to observation. When cameras pointed at a light, it would sometimes change behavior, shifting direction, pulsing, or moving toward the observation point. Multiple witnesses have described feeling that the lights were aware of being watched, that they possess some form of consciousness or intelligence that responded to human attention. The scientific data is undeniable. The lights exist. They register on multiple types of sensors. They reflect radar. They appear in photographs and videos from different angles simultaneously. They are physically present in some form, but their behavior suggests they exist more strongly, more frequently, more persistently when they are being observed. One theory proposed by quantum physicist Erling Strand suggests the lights might be some form of plasma phenomenon triggered by the valley's unique geology. But this doesn't explain why observation affects their frequency. Another theory, more disturbing, suggests the lights might be a manifestation of collective consciousness, thoughts made visible, attention given form. The valley's unique magnetic properties might allow mental observation to affect physical reality in ways that aren't possible elsewhere. The Hessdalen Lights continue to appear. The research station continues to record them, and the correlation remains. When people look, the lights appear. When no one is watching, the valley goes dark, as if the lights only exist when someone is there to see them. The Double-Slit observer effect. In 1801, Thomas Young conducted an experiment that would eventually reveal one of the most disturbing properties of reality. He fired light through two slits and watched it create an interference pattern on a screen behind them. Proof that light behaved as a wave. Simple physics. But when quantum mechanics repeated the experiment with individual particles in the 20th century, they discovered something impossible. The particles knew when they were being watched. When electrons are fired one at a time, through a double-slit apparatus with no observation, they create an interference pattern, as if each individual electron passes through both slits simultaneously and interferes with itself. Impossible behavior for a particle. But when scientists place detectors to observe which slit each electron passes through, the interference pattern disappears. The electrons suddenly behave like particles that pass through one slit or the other, never both. The act of observation changes reality. Not our knowledge of reality, reality itself. The electron exists in a state of quantum superposition, passing through both slits at once until the moment someone tries to observe it. Then it chooses one path and becomes a definite particle, as if observation forces reality to decide what is real. This has been demonstrated thousands of times in laboratories worldwide. It's not controversial among physicists. It's fundamental quantum mechanics. What's disturbing is the implication. At the quantum level, nothing has definite properties until it's observed. Particles exist in probabilistic clouds of potential states until measurement forces them into actuality. In 2015, Australian researchers demonstrated that the quantum eraser experiment works even when the choice to observe is made after the particle has already passed through the slits. Retroactive observation changes what happened in the past. The particle's path through the slits depends on whether someone will observe it in the future. Effect precedes cause. Reality rewrites itself based on observation that hasn't happened yet. The implications scale disturbingly. If individual particles only have definite properties when observed, what about larger objects made of particles? The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that all of reality exists in superposition until consciousness observes it and collapses the wave function into definite states. The universe might be a probability cloud that only becomes real when someone is there to see it. Most physicists treat this as a measurement problem, something about the interaction between measuring devices and quantum systems, not about consciousness itself. But experiments testing this interpretation have failed to resolve the paradox. The many worlds interpretation suggests observation splits reality into parallel universes where every possibility occurs. The pilot wave theory suggests hidden variables guide particles deterministically. None of these explanations are satisfying. All of them suggest that observation, the simple act of looking, fundamentally alters what exists. Objects at the quantum level only exist when someone is looking at them, and we have no idea where quantum mechanics stops and classical reality begins. The Flannan Lighthouse. On December 26, 1900, a relief vessel arrived at the Flannan Lighthouse in Scotland's Outer Hebrides to find all 3 lighthouse keepers missing. The lighthouse was in perfect working order. The clocks had stopped. The table was set for a meal that had never been eaten, and objects were in states that made no sense, present in inventories taken days before but missing when searched for, only to reappear in subsequent searches as if they existed only when someone was actively looking for them. The official investigation documented the scene meticulously. The lighthouse log showed that on December 12th, the keepers had noted a severe storm, though weather records showed calm seas that day. On December 13th, the log described damage to equipment that subsequent inspection showed had never occurred. The final entry was on December 15th, stating, "God is over all." Then silence. What investigators found was physically contradictory. The west landing stage showed storm damage. The east landing stage was undamaged, but the wind direction on any given day would have affected both equally. Equipment was listed as damaged in the log, but appeared functional. Ropes were described as lost, but were found coiled in storage. The keepers' oilskins were present in ways that contradicted where they should have been if the men had died in a storm. It was as if reality in the lighthouse had become unstable. Objects existed in multiple contradictory states, damaged and intact, present and missing, with the definite state depending on who was looking and when. The lighthouse keeper's final log entries described things that hadn't happened according to physical evidence, but which they clearly believed they had witnessed. Subsequent lighthouse keepers reported disturbing experiences. Objects would be in different positions than where they had been left. Equipment would be found in impossible states, wet when it should be dry, cold when it should be warm, functioning after being confirmed broken. The phenomena always occurred when no one was actively observing. Turning your back was enough for reality to shift. One keeper in the 1950s described methodically cataloging the lighthouse's inventory, only to find items missing when he rechecked his list minutes later. When he searched specifically for the missing items, he would find them exactly where they should have been, where he had already looked, as if the items only existed when he was actively searching for them. The lighthouse was automated in 1971, replacing human keepers with machines. Since automation, the strange phenomena have apparently ceased, or, at least, no one is present to observe them. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse stands as a reminder that observation might be more than passive witnessing. It might be the active force that holds reality in a stable state. And when no one is watching, reality might fluctuate between states, between possibilities, only collapsing into definite existence when consciousness forces it to choose. The Cottingley Fairies, Reconsidered. In 1917, two young girls in Cottingley, England, took photographs that appeared to show them interacting with fairies. The images became internationally famous after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle endorsed them. In 1983, the women finally admitted the fairies were cardboard cutouts, an elaborate hoax, case closed, except for one photograph that both women insisted, until their deaths, was genuine, and except for the disturbing reports from the photographic plates themselves. The fifth Cottingley photograph shows Francis Griffiths surrounded by what appear to be fairies in flight. Unlike the other four images, which showed obvious paper cutouts, this photograph has never been satisfactorily explained as a simple fake. Multiple photographic experts who examined the original glass plate negative found anomalies that suggested the fairies were somehow present during exposure, but only during exposure. When researchers attempted to analyze the original plate under microscopic examination, they found that the images on the plate changed subtly depending on the angle and intensity of observation. Under low magnification, the fairies appeared as blurred motion. Under high magnification, they seemed to dissolve into artifact patterns. But when viewed at a specific intermediate level, roughly equivalent to what the human eye would perceive, they appeared as distinct figures. Francis Griffiths maintained until her death in 1986 that this fifth photograph showed real creatures that she and Elsie had genuinely seen in the garden. She claimed the fairies only appeared when the girls were present and attentive to the garden, that their presence and observation seemed to make the creatures manifest. When adults came to look, the fairies disappeared. When the girls looked away, the fairies vanished. Only when they were present and watching with belief did the creatures exist. Modern digital analysis of high resolution and scans of the original plate has revealed something that 1980s technology couldn't detect. The fairies in the image have motion blur characteristics inconsistent with any physical object moving through space during the exposure time. The blur patterns suggest they were manifesting and vanishing during the exposure itself, existing in frames of observation but not in between. This brings the Cottingley case into a different context. Perhaps the first 4 photographs were fakes created by girls trying to replicate something they had genuinely experienced but couldn't reliably reproduce. Perhaps the 5th photograph captured something real, not fairies in the folkloric sense, but some phenomenon that manifests only under observation, that exists in the gaps of attention and consciousness. The quantum physicist David Bohm proposed that consciousness might interact with quantum potentials to collapse wave functions into perceived reality. If consciousness can affect particles, could focused childhood belief affect larger-scale phenomena? Could the intense imaginative attention of 2 young girls literally create manifestations that existed only when observed and believed in? The Cottingley fairies have been dismissed as hoax for decades, but the 5th photograph remains anomalous. And Francis Griffiths' insistence that observation created the fairies, that they existed because the girls were there to see them, sounds disturbingly like descriptions of quantum mechanics by physicists who study observation effects. The Marfa Lights. In the desert near Marfa, Texas, mysterious lights have been reported for over a century. They appear as glowing orbs that move erratically across the landscape, split into multiple lights, merge back together, and behave in ways that no identified phenomenon can explain. Thousands of witnesses have seen them, but the Marfa Lights exhibit a property that has puzzled researchers. They appear significantly more often when people are actively watching for them. The official Marfa Lights viewing area is located on Highway 90, 9 miles east of town. On any given night, visitors might see nothing, or they might witness a spectacular display of multiple lights performing impossible aerial maneuvers. But park rangers and long-term observers have noted a pattern. The lights seem to know when people are watching. When the viewing area is crowded with observers, the lights appear more frequently and perform more dramatic displays. When a single witness is present, lights appear but behave more subtly. When the area is empty, as confirmed by automated cameras during periods of zero visitation, the lights are rarely recorded. The correlation is strong enough that some researchers believe consciousness itself is triggering the manifestation. In 2004, a team from the Society for Scientific Exploration installed automated recording equipment that operated continuously regardless of human presence. Over 6 months, the equipment captured far fewer light events than human observers reported during the same period. When researchers were present operating the equipment, light events increased. The equipment recorded what human witnesses saw, but when humans weren't present, the phenomenon largely disappeared. One experiment deliberately tested the observation effect. Researchers set up multiple camera stations around the viewing area, some actively monitored by humans, others running automatically. The cameras with human operators recorded significantly more light events than the automated stations, despite all equipment being identical and covering the same viewing areas. This suggests the Marfa Lights might not be a constant physical phenomenon that we occasionally observe. They might be an observation-dependent phenomenon that manifests in response to consciousness. The lights exist because people are there to see them. Without observers, they might not exist at all. Skeptics argue the Marfa Lights are distant car headlights refracted through atmospheric layers, a form of superior mirage. This explains some sightings, but not the historical reports that predate automobiles, not the movement patterns that don't match vehicle traffic, and certainly not the correlation between observation and manifestation. Headlights don't become more frequent because people are watching for them. The Marfa Lights remain unexplained. They're real. Thousands have witnessed them. They appear in photographs and videos. The phenomenon is undeniable, but they might only be real when someone is there to see them. Turn away, stop watching, leave the desert empty of consciousness, and the lights might cease to exist until the next observer arrives and brings them back into reality. The Philadelphia Experiment Revisited. According to legend, in October 1943, the U.S. Navy destroyer escort USS Eldridge was made invisible and teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk as part of a secret experiment in electromagnetic cloaking. The experiment allegedly had horrifying consequences. Sailors fused with the ship's structure, others going mad, the ship phasing in and out of visibility. The Navy denies it happened. But declassified documents from related research programs reveal something stranger. Experiments in observation-dependent invisibility that suggest the Philadelphia experiment might have been attempting something fundamentally different than cloaking technology. In the 1940s, physicist John von Neumann was researching the role of consciousness in quantum measurement, specifically whether observation itself could be manipulated to change what was physically real. Declassified documents from this research program describe experiments testing whether objects could be made unobservable not through physical cloaking but through quantum manipulation that prevented observation from collapsing their wave functions into definite states. The concept is sophisticated. In quantum mechanics, objects exist in superposition until observed. Von Neumann theorized that if you could prevent observation from occurring, not by blocking sight, but by preventing the quantum measurement interaction, an object would remain in superposition, existing in a probabilistic state rather than a definite one. It would be present in a quantum sense, but not observable in a classical sense. Effectively invisible, not because it couldn't be seen, but because it wasn't fully real. Several witnesses to the alleged Philadelphia experiment described the ship as fuzzy or out of phase, not blocked from view, but existing in an undefined state. They described looking at the ship and being unable to focus on it, as if their consciousness couldn't quite grasp it as a real object. Some described the sensation that the ship was there and not there simultaneously, flickering between states. If the Philadelphia experiment involved attempts to manipulate observation at a quantum level, the reported consequences make disturbing sense. Sailors fused with the ship's structure might have been caught in superposition, states where the boundary between human and metal became undefined. Madness could result from experiencing reality from inside a quantum superposition, existing in multiple states simultaneously, unable to collapse into a single definite experience. The experiment allegedly failed because consciousness couldn't be controlled as precisely as quantum particles. Human observation kept partially collapsing the wave function, creating a fluctuating state where the ship existed and didn't exist, based on subtle shifts in attention and awareness. The ship became observation-dependent at a macro scale, existing fully when strongly observed, phasing into superposition when observation weakened. Modern physics has achieved similar effects at microscopic scales. In 2011, researchers at the University of California demonstrated quantum hiding of photons, making them undetectable while still technically present. The technique involved preventing the measurement interaction that would collapse their quantum state. At microscales, objects can be made to exist in states that are real but unobservable. The Philadelphia experiment may never have been about invisibility in the conventional sense. It may have been an attempt to apply quantum observation principles to macro-scale objects, to make a ship exist only when observed and vanish into quantum superposition when observation ceased. If it happened, it failed catastrophically, but it may have proven that sufficiently large objects can be made observation-dependent, existing only when someone is there to see them. The SCP-055 Phenomenon. In the early 2000s, a collaborative fiction project called the SCP Foundation began documenting fictional anomalous objects in a clinical scientific style. One of these objects, SCP-055, was described as an anti-meme, something that existed but couldn't be remembered. You could observe it while looking at it, but the moment you looked away, all memory of it vanished. The concept was pure fiction. Then researchers studying memory and attention began finding evidence that anti-memetic objects might actually exist. Cognitive psychologist Daniel Simons demonstrated inattentional blindness with his famous invisible gorilla experiment, showing that people fail to notice obvious stimuli when attention is focused elsewhere. But subsequent research found something stranger. Certain objects seem to actively resist attention and memory in ways that go beyond normal perceptual limitations. In 2013, a research team studying selective attention presented subjects with objects designed to be unmemorable, average shapes, neutral colors, no distinctive features. Some subjects later reported that certain objects seemed to disappear from thought, even while they were looking at them. They could see the object, describe it while viewing it, but the moment they looked away, All memory vanished. They couldn't recall having seen anything at all. The effect was rare but consistent across multiple subjects and study protocols. Certain combinations of visual properties seemed to create objects that existed only during direct observation, objects that consciousness couldn't hold in memory, that slipped out of awareness the instant attention moved away. Researchers attempted to identify what made these objects anti-mimetic. Was it the visual properties, the psychological state of the observer, the context of observation? They found no consistent pattern, except that once an object exhibited anti-mimetic properties for a subject, it remained anti-mimetic. You could show them the same object repeatedly, and each time they would see it while looking, forget it instantly upon looking away, and have no memory of previous viewings. The implications are disturbing. If objects can exist in a state where they're observable but not memorable, they effectively only exist during the moments of observation. They vanish from reality when you look away. Not physically, but from any meaningful sense of existence. An object that no one can remember might as well not exist at all. Some researchers have proposed that anti-mimetic objects might be common but undetectable by definition. We couldn't study them because we can't remember them long enough to document their properties. The objects we've identified as anti-mimetic might be the weakest examples, objects that are only partially resistant to memory. Stronger anti-memes might surround us constantly, existing only in the brief moments we glance at them before they vanish from consciousness entirely. The SCP-055 concept was fiction, but it described a real possibility. Objects that only exist when someone is actively observing them, that cease to exist in any practical sense the moment observation ends. And we might be surrounded by them without knowing, because the nature of anti-memes prevents us from studying, documenting, or even realizing they exist. The Schrödinger's cat paradox made real. In 1935, physicist Erwin Schrödinger proposed a thought experiment to illustrate the absurdity of applying quantum mechanics to everyday objects. A cat in a box with a quantum-triggered poison mechanism would be simultaneously alive and dead until someone opened the box and observed it. The paradox was meant to show that quantum superposition couldn't possibly apply to large objects. In 2010, researchers managed to create a macro-scale object that existed in quantum superposition and proved Schrödinger's cat could be real. Andrew Cleland's team at UC Santa Barbara created a tiny mechanical resonator, visible to the naked eye, and cooled it to its quantum ground state. They then demonstrated that the object could be placed in superposition, vibrating and not vibrating simultaneously. The object existed in two states at once until measurement forced it into a single definite state. They had created a Schrödinger's cat at macro scale, an object that literally didn't have definite properties until someone observed it. The implications were staggering. Quantum superposition wasn't limited to individual particles. Objects large enough to see could exist in undefined states, present and absent, moving and still, existing and not existing, until observation forced reality to choose. The boundary between quantum mechanics and classical physics wasn't where scientists thought it was. Subsequent experiments pushed the scale larger. In 2019, researchers demonstrated quantum superposition in objects containing billions of atoms. The objects were small by everyday standards, microscopic rather than visible, but enormous by quantum standards. They existed in multiple states simultaneously, only becoming definite when measured. These experiments suggest that, in principle, any object, regardless of size, could exist in superposition if sufficiently isolated from environmental observation. Observation in this context doesn't require consciousness. Any interaction with the environment that could reveal the object's state counts as measurement. But the implication remains disturbing. Without observation, objects don't have definite properties. They exist in probabilistic clouds of potential states. This means that an object truly isolated from all observation, including environmental interactions, wouldn't exist in any definite sense. It would be real in that it affects probability distributions, but it wouldn't be here or there, moving or still, present or absent. Only observation would collapse it into a definite state and make it real in the way we understand reality. The universe is constantly observing itself through particle interactions, making true isolation nearly impossible at normal scales. But the principle holds. Without observation, existence is undefined. Objects only exist in the definite sense when something, environment, instrument, consciousness, is observing them. Reality is perpetually collapsing from quantum superposition into classical definiteness through the constant process of mutual observation. And if observation ceased, if nothing was looking, reality itself might dissolve back into undefined quantum probability. The Chronovisor Controversy. In the 1960s, Father Pellegrino Ernetti, an Italian priest and scientist, claimed to have built a device called the Chronovisor, a machine that could observe past events by detecting residual electromagnetic radiation. He allegedly used it to witness Christ's crucifixion and other historical events. The Catholic Church condemned the device and Ernetti's claims, but the theoretical foundation of the Chronovisor suggests something stranger than time viewing, a device that might create the past through the act of observing it. Ernetti claimed the Chronovisor worked by detecting and reconstructing electromagnetic traces left by past events. But physicists who studied his theoretical framework noted a problem. The device, as described, would be reconstructing past events based on incomplete information, essentially creating a probabilistic model of what might have happened. The observation wouldn't be passive viewing, it would be active construction of reality from quantum possibility. This connects to the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, which demonstrates that observation in the present can affect what happened in the past. If the Chronovisor worked as theorized, it wouldn't be viewing a past that had already happened. It would be collapsing past quantum probabilities into definite states through present observation. The act of viewing would create the specific past being viewed. Several scientists who allegedly saw the Chronovisor in operation described disturbing properties. The images shown were never quite stable. They would flicker and change subtly, as if the past itself was shifting based on observation. Different observers watching the same event would see slightly different versions. When observers discussed what they'd seen and compared notes, the images would converge toward a consensus version, as if observation and discussion were collectively creating a definite past from multiple possibilities. If true, this suggests the past might not be fixed. It might exist in quantum superposition, all possible histories simultaneously real until observation collapses them into the specific history we remember. The Chronovisor wouldn't violate causality because it wouldn't be changing a fixed past. It would be selecting which version of a superposition past becomes real through the act of observation. The device was allegedly dismantled on orders from the Vatican. Ernetti recanted some of his claims before his death, but maintained that the theoretical principle was sound. The photographic evidence he provided, an image of Christ on the cross, was later identified as a photograph of a sculpture. But the theoretical framework remains. A device that observes the past might not be viewing what happened, but creating what happened through the act of observation. This explains why the past appears fixed. It's constantly being observed through its effects on the present, constantly being measured through physical traces and remembered through consciousness. The observation never stops, so the past remains collapsed into a definite state. But if a device could observe past quantum states directly, without being constrained by present physical evidence, it might see the past in superposition, all histories existing simultaneously, and through observation, collapse them into the specific past that then becomes what happened. The Chronovisor may never have existed, but the quantum mechanics it was allegedly based on is real, and those mechanics suggest that even the past might only exist in definite form when someone is observing it. These 10 cases share an impossible property. They exist only when observed, as if consciousness and reality are inseparably linked. From quantum particles that change behavior when measured to lights that appear when watched, to faces that form when someone is there to see them, the pattern repeats. Observation doesn't just reveal reality, it creates reality. Physics has confirmed this at the quantum level. The double-slit experiment proves that particles exist in superposition until measured. The quantum eraser shows that observation can affect the past. Experiments with macro-scale objects demonstrate that even visible objects can exist in undefined states until observed. The science is settled. At the quantum level, nothing has definite properties until observation forces it into a specific state. What's unsettling is how this principle might scale beyond quantum mechanics. The Bélmez Faces appeared more frequently when observed. The Hessdalen Lights manifested more often when watched. The Marfa Lights synchronized their appearances with human presence. The Flannan Lighthouse became unstable when unobserved. These aren't quantum particles. They're phenomena at human scales, exhibiting observation-dependent existence. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either consciousness has a special role in collapsing quantum states, meaning our minds literally create reality through observation, or observation-dependent existence isn't limited to quantum scales. It might be a property of reality at all scales, normally masked by constant environmental observation that keeps reality stable. The simulation hypothesis offers one explanation. If reality is computed rather than fundamental, it would make sense to only fully render what's being observed, keeping everything else in a low-resolution, probabilistic state. Video games work this way. Only the area around the player is fully detailed. Everything else exists in simplified form until observed. But we don't need simulation theory to make sense of observation-dependent reality. Quantum mechanics already tells us this is how the universe works. The question isn't whether objects only exist when observed. At the quantum level, this is established fact. The question is where quantum mechanics stops. Most physicists believe there's a boundary where quantum weirdness gives way to classical definite reality. But experiments keep pushing that boundary larger. Objects that should be classical keep exhibiting quantum properties. The line between quantum and classical is blurrier than we thought. Perhaps there is no line. Perhaps all objects at all scales exist in superposition until observed. But the constant observation of environmental interactions keeps large objects collapsed into definite states most of the time. Perhaps the anomalies in this video occur in places where normal observation breaks down, where isolation, intention, consciousness, or unknown factors create pockets where larger-scale objects can slip back into quantum indefiniteness. If this is true, then reality is fundamentally different than we imagine. The universe isn't a collection of definite objects existing independently of observation. It's a probability field that collapses into specific reality only where and when it's being observed. Everything else, the vast majority of the universe, exists in undefined superposition, potentially real but not actually real until someone looks. This raises questions we can't yet answer. What counts as observation? Does it require consciousness, or does any measurement suffice? If a camera records something but no one watches the footage, was it really observed? If a tree falls in a forest with no one around, does it exist in a definite state, or is it in quantum superposition until someone finds it? The objects in this video suggest observation matters. They exist when watched and vanish, change, or fade when unwatched. They are the anomalies that reveal the rule. Reality is observation dependent. Nothing exists in definite form until someone is there to see it. And if you stop reading this now, if you look away from the screen, if you cease to observe these words, do they still exist? Or do they dissolve back into quantum probability, waiting for the next observer to collapse them into reality again? The answer might disturb you. Because if observation creates reality, then reality only exists where you are, in the moment you're looking. Everything else, the past, the future, the unobserved present, might be probability clouds waiting to become real. Turn away. Stop observing. And wonder what ceases to exist the moment you're not there to see it.